And if they couldn't even get a simple thing right about my identity, that was like, that felt very, a small thing, but very powerful thing that was important to have the right name above your bed, because you could very easily lose your sense of self in a place like that.
Thank you very much for joining me today. And today is the first day of the Mental Health Awareness Week, which is from today till Sunday, the
Sunday,
18th.
yeah, 18th.
So yeah, this is good timing for our conversation. And I have listened to your TEDx story. I think I've listened to about 8 times, if I did this morning twice. And
Yeah.
I've read your book as well, so I'm really excited for our listeners to go through kind of your story. So before I get too excited, let's start with introductions. If someone is to ask you who you are, how would you normally introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm Mandy Legg. I'm a TEDx and mental health impact speaker and author and a community leader. So I've worked in community arts, I've worked in children's services, I've had my own business doing coaching and training, and now I have my own business doing speaking. So yeah, and I was mayoress of Milton Keynes. My husband was mayor. We were deputies in 2022, 23, 23, 24. We were mayor and mayoress of Milton Keynes, which was an amazing experience.
Yeah, that is very interesting. Let me start by actually saying thank you very much for your service to our wonderful city of Milton Keynes. I'm from Milton Keynes as well. I live in Milton Keynes, so I've adopted Milton Keynes as my second home.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, no, that's really good. So if we are to say at the end of this conversation, what would you like our listeners to walk away with?
Just to understand that the title of my talk is Hold On to Yourself. And we all go through struggles in life, whether it's divorce, mental health, could be addiction, could be parenting issues with our young people in our family. So at different times in our life, we all go through these struggles, and just to remember that it's really important that we hold on to who we are during those struggles, and that something really good can come out the other side. Even if extreme things happen, like being sectioned, you can go from being sectioned to being a mayoress of a city. So yeah, don't give up. Just don't give up, whatever. And don't always feel you have to be ready for the next step, because we're never ready, and we always think, oh, we've got to be perfect and just keep waiting to be ready. But no, just take the next step before you're ready, because we're never ready. When I moved to Milton Keynes 33 years ago, I was less than sort of just over a year after having that hospital experience, and I definitely wasn't ready to be making a huge leap like that. And in fact, I had this phobia of driving on motorways and dual carriageways, and I don't know if I didn't really tune into Milton Keynes being dual carriageways everywhere
and roundabouts.
But if I'd have waited till I could drive on a dual carriageway and feel happy and confident, I would have never come to Milton Keynes. So yeah.
No, that's very powerful, Mandy. And what we do here at Life Campus Podcast is we try to talk to people about their real life kind of experiences, so that we can learn from people who have already gone through the journey, and they can look back now and say, okay, this is how I navigated this journey. So for this week, we are focusing on mental health. That's why we are talking to you, and you have a story to share. You've been sharing your story, your life story, and people have been learning from it. So today, that's what we want to do. We want to learn from it. What can we learn? What can we take away from? How can we prepare? Because there will be someone listening who is going through a difficult mental health kind of situation at the moment. Just knowing that someone has gone through it and have managed to navigate that and come out the other side, and now they're in a position where they can also help other people to go through that journey is very powerful. So take us back to the beginning, 30 years ago. What happened?
Yeah. So it was April the 1st, April Fool's Day.
Oh,
couldn't have picked a better day to be locked in a house and wait for psychiatrists and doctors to come and section me. So yeah, it was April the 1st. I was 30 years old, and I was leading a community arts charity at the time. So one day there I was doing a project with young people where we were building outdoor kilns. I was writing funding bids, leading a team, and yeah, the next day kind of thing, there I was locked in a house by what was then my first husband, who I'd just a week before decided that the relationship wasn't going anywhere. And I moved into a friend's house that week, and she'd gone away, and lots of kind of things started happening around that time. It was almost like my brain went into another reality, and I think in that space it was I was doing a lot of things that shocked the people around me, and I had no fear in that space. And I also had no awareness I was in another space, if it makes sense, because we often think if we can have this big fear of mental illness and what it means to go into a psychotic space, what it feels like. Do we know we're there? For me, I really didn't know that I was in a psychotic space. I was just doing what I was doing, and it kind of all made sense to me. But it obviously in real life it didn't make sense. And fortunately, I was then lots of people having conversations with doctors around me, like my husband and my friends were talking about what was going on around me, and I was getting this feeling that something was going on. And then it came to the point where the doctors had been spoken to, and the sectioning process takes three doctors, two doctors and a social worker, to come and sign those papers to section someone under the Mental Health Act. Because I didn't go voluntary, because I wasn't in the space where I was in an awareness that there was anything wrong. So I had to, my husband, who had to lock me in the house all day, because it took from like 7:30 in the morning till 10 p.m. at night for this process to take place. And as you can imagine, I was kind of desperate to escape along that way. And one of my friends was also with him, and I don't know what we talked about all throughout that day, but it was like the day just seemed like the worst day in my life in that sense. And I remember at one point I phoned in one of the organisations I worked with in community arts, and I was on the phone to the administrator for like an hour. I don't know what I was talking about, but she just stayed there and listened, and just held that space for me whilst I was in that extreme situation. Because I was, by the time the GP, the social worker, and the psychiatrist were the last person to come, and he came about sort of 9 o'clock at night. And at that point, I was climbing up the wall, trying to get out the window, standing on the radiator, and the radiator crashed onto the floor, and I realised that, there was no escape. And that the psychiatrist signed those papers to say that the ambulance and the police would come and collect me. So
that sounds like a very long day,
long drawn out process.
and so what was the feeling like? If you look back, do you remember what were you feeling during that time when
I think But by the time I was climbing up the wall, trying to get out the window, total fear of what was coming. I mean, if you think 30 years, 33 years ago, to be precise, mental health was in a very different place to what it is now. It wasn't talked about. You know, I'd probably in recent years before that watched One Flew Over the Cuckoo Nest, with the film with Jack Nicholson in the mental health hospital, and that was, you know, that was what you could see mental health hospitals might be like. I had this huge fear that I would be given ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, against my will. Before, I was very much into holistic therapies, and homeopathy was something I was using at that point to help with my health. And so it very much represented something that didn't align with who I was or who I saw myself. So it was a very scary situation. And before the ambulance and police arrived, I actually went and got in the bath. I don't know why. I went and had a bath. I guess after all that day, that it was just extreme. And I went and got in the bath, and I was in the bath when the doorbell rang, and I knew then there was no escaping. And I could drown in the bath, but I had no intention of doing that. But you know, that was the only little escape at that point. So, and then remember at that point, I got out of the bath and I went because I was staying at my friend's house, and she was a lecturer. And so she had nice suits in her wardrobe. And I thought, oh, if I put a nice suit on, perhaps they'll see that I'm okay, that I am in my right mind, and maybe I need to put this suit on. But no, I went in my leggings and jumper. So I didn't go in my friend's clothes. Yeah, that was something that was going through my mind at the time. And then, you know, being taken on your own in an ambulance, and taken to a hospital and sat in a little room where they kind of see you in, if you like, sign you in and do that processing before they give you a bed. It was like, I was very lucky. I had a lovely nurse that was there, the night nurse that was there, and she was incredibly empathetic and kind. So that part of the process, because as you can imagine, having that huge stressful day like that, it was just like arriving there and meeting this smiling, kind person that was holding an emotional space was the best for me in that situation.
No, that is yeah. It sounds something like out of a movie, something scary. That, you know, that loneliness, that feeling of not knowing what's happening to you.
Yeah.
I take it in your world, everything was fine. Then suddenly things are not fine, and
Yes,
just
and
trying to
it's
make
not.
sense of it can be very difficult. So
Yeah.
in your book, you talked about, before you were taken away, you locked yourself in the bathroom, and you felt like you had two options, either to drown in the bath or to go and get help. Why did you choose going to get help?
I don't think I even saw it as going to get help, because I didn't think there was anything wrong at that point. So it was just knowing that I didn't want to die. You know, I had an amazing job working in community arts, lots of friends and family. Yes, my marriage was going the wrong way at that time, but that was the main, you know, big hiccup at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that choice, or that might have flashed through my mind to think that it wasn't in any seriousness, you know, a serious plan or an intent. It was more of, that would be the only way to escape this situation. And then, knowing that I had to just go and embrace what was going to follow, because like you say, I had no control over it. I had no control over them giving me medication. I had no control over, you know, what was happening to me during the day in there, or where I was sleeping, or, you know, I was in a ward with lots of other people at first. females. Yeah, so all very, traumatic, and people behaving, acting out their traumas and their distress, and in that situation where it's a crisis situation, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
yeah, it was a very scary place. At times, it was a very human place, and the connections and powerful, links, that connections I made with the people took me through that space, the village I created in the hospital.
Yeah.
But it was also the opposite of that, was immensely scary and fearful space as well.
Yeah. And you mentioned that before this episode, nothing like that had happened to you before. This was just something that just came on, no warning. It just happened, and then you
Yeah.
just had to deal with it.
Yeah, in terms of that psychotic episode,
Mm.
I'd had anxiety, sort of that kind of generalized anxiety where it sits in the pit of your stomach like a butterflies. And I'd had the odd panic attack. I remember at the age of 17, I had my first panic attack where I was asked to read a 4 sides of tiny A4 writing in the sociology A-level class, and I had to read it to the class, and I just started having this huge panic response after reading half a page, and sat down and said, I can't do this. And yeah, and all the way then through my degree, I wouldn't speak, and I don't mean I wouldn't speak, I wouldn't do that public speaking in the class. I avoided it and was allowed to avoid it. No one sort of helped me sort of overcome that, because I say 32 years ago, people didn't talk about those things.
No.
And yeah, it was a very different situation around whether, I didn't talk to anyone about having panic attacks, because that's, we just didn't. There was something to talk to, and if I'd have spoken to my dad about it, he'd had panic attacks in his younger life. He then shared with me when, obviously at that point, because both of his parents died at the age of, he'd lost his dad at 6 and his mum at 11, and he went into a Dr. Bernardo's home, a naval school in Suffolk. And so you can imagine that his life was full of, disruption and anxiety. You can understand why someone in that situation would have panic attacks going forwards. But they talk about generational trauma, kind of, it comes down, doesn't it? And we understand mental health in lots of different ways nowadays.
And I think you touched on something very powerful one there. You say the power of sharing, because you said if you only had talked to your dad about it, he would have
Yes,
similar,
that's right.
or probably
Yeah.
would have turned out differently, and you would have looked at kind of the anxiety that you were having in a different
Yes.
way. Because I know there are so many people in different communities, growing up and living in communities, and mental health is not something that is talked about. I can, say from my own experience growing up in Zimbabwe, mental health is something that mental health difficulties is something that you hide. It's not something for you to discuss. Things are changing now. People are getting more aware that mental health difficulties is just the same as your physical health. Sometimes you have good physical health. Sometimes you have got poor physical health. That's the same as mental health. You just have to know how to work with it, how to manage it, where to get help and when to get help. And I think sometimes sharing what you're feeling is one of the most powerful things.
Absolutely. Which is why I do talk about it now.
Okay, so let's go to the mental health hospital that you were sectioned in. For some reason, because I read the book, whilst I was reading the book, it kind of took me to, I had a visual in my head. I felt like I was with you there, walking into this strange place that you've never been to, and seeing all these new faces and things like that. So I guess the question I have is, when you find yourself in a situation like that, and in your book you said you realized that there was they were using the wrong name for you.
Yes.
That's something that troubled you a lot, for 2 weeks trying to get that sorted. How was that feeling, and what what were you feeling when you're trying to get your name right, people to get your name right, but it just was not happening?
Yeah, I think because my husband had signed me in, and I kept my maiden name. I didn't take his name in that marriage. So my name was different to his, but they'd put his name above my bed. So yeah, it was, total frustration that his name, even though we just separated and we were going through a lot of that angst around that, it was above my bed. And if they couldn't even get a simple thing right about my identity, that was like, that felt very, a small thing, but very powerful thing, that was important to have the right name above your bed, because you could very easily lose your sense of self in a place like that. And yeah, so having the right name above the bed is something that's really key to not feeling that sense of losing yourself.
So what you were trying to do, I guess, thinking about now the book that you've written, and the title is Hold On to Yourself.
Yeah.
Is that where that started? The idea of like, I need to hold on to myself, and something as simple as getting my name right in this situation is very
Yeah,
important for me.
that's right.
Okay.
And the camera is very much a part of holding on to myself. And the reason why I had the camera in the hospital was because there was a project in community arts in the city I was living, where there was a psychiatric hospital that was closing down. And a writer and a photographer were brought in to create a looking back, looking forward book of people who'd lived in this institution for quite a long time, big parts of their life, and then would be moved out into the community. That was in '92. That was a government policy then, to move people out into the community and have less people locked up in the psychiatric hospital, or contained in that way. And yeah, so I was an artist. I used a camera as part of a women's photography group. And so I don't know, I guess that project being in my mind, I thought I just took my camera with me in that situation. And yeah, it sat in my locker. And yeah, it was George that then reminded me one day to come on, let's bring your camera out. Let's take the camera out and take some photos. So that's how all of the exhibitions started, and, capturing my daily life inside the hospital with the camera.
Yeah.
And I'd take photos of other patients when they had their families visiting. And because it was a day of in the time of films, my friends would take the films away, develop them, and bring them back. And I'd give the other patients the photos of them with their children. And it was part of, people really enjoyed that.
Your camera, I was going to go to it. Your camera played a huge role in who you became, really, in your journey. Do you still have the camera with you?
I don't have that one particular camera now. I obviously moved on, become digital. It's a shame I didn't just keep it as a.
Yeah.
I'm not a big hoarder of things. I do tend to kind of like keep things as minimal as I can. So yeah, I don't have that camera, but obviously, like everyone, I use the mobile the camera, the iPhone, to capture what I'm capturing. But I wouldn't describe myself as. I mean, that exhibition was my one-off kind of wonder, if you like. Yeah, I had something to say. I created that piece of work. It was funded by London Disability Arts Forum and toured around the country, and ITV and BBC Two made programs about it. So that was my only piece of artwork that continued, that travelled around. That was the only piece of only exhibition I created that was taken forward in that way.
Yeah, and I think it was something that kind of, from reading and listening to your kind of TEDx talk, the camera was something that helped you to keep grounded in a way, to focus on something other than your
Yeah,
health at the time. And
yeah,
you talk about George.
yeah.
Let's talk about George. When when I mentioned the name George, what's coming in your mind? What's the
Yeah.
feeling?
It, George, he'd been in the hospital for a long time as a patient, and yeah, he on the very first day, I think he's perhaps saw it as his role to any new patients coming in, he'd have a little chat with them if they wanted. He'd take them out for a walk and show them around the grounds, and because the hospital itself is an amazing place, you know, in terms of what hospitals are nowadays. But I'll come back to that in a minute. Just keep focus on George now. But George, yeah, so he was like a friendly face in the midst of all of this, everything going on, and he took me out, showed me where you could go and buy things with you to have a bit of money with you, and you could buy chocolate or buy, you know, there was a cafe across in the other building. He'd take me over there and take me round the grounds. And yeah, we did spend a lot in that 2 months. We spent a lot of time just walking around the grounds with the camera, and just the weather was amazing. It was April and May, but the weather was really, really good sunny weather. So we'd sit out on the field. There was a big grass field, just sit and sometimes not even talk, just, you know, be in each other's company. And yeah, we'd walk around the grounds. We'd even tease the psychiatrists. They'd come past in their cars in the morning, and I was 30, he was 60, and we'd lock arms and pretend we were like, you know, dating, when obviously we weren't. But we'd just play a little joke to ourselves. But yeah, he was just a person that I got a lot of kind of comfort from his companionship during that time, amongst a lot of other people as well. He was very important in that respect.
Yeah, your relationship with George, for me, it showed me how powerful we are as human beings, and how much we can affect other people, either positively or negatively. And
Yeah,
from what I can tell, George showed up for you in a very positive way in a time that you really needed, and probably didn't realize what he was doing for you.
no,
And that's what happens. I did a solo episode last week where I talked about the power of you know, being a human being, and just being mindful of how we go about affecting other people around us. And
yes,
it reminds me of this African philosophy. It's called Ubuntu. Basically, what it means is humanity to all. I am because you are, or we are
yeah,
because, or you are because I am. So
yeah,
just emphasizes the power that we have as individuals. And you also mentioned the relationship that you had with was it Tony, who was
yes, the
the guy with
table
table
tennis.
tennis guy.
Yeah,
So you really had these human connections that I feel like in today's society we don't have those human connections that are very meaningful. Everything seems to have just gone online. And so looking back and comparing it to now, if you are to give someone advice who is going through a difficult mental health situation, how can they process this? You had people around you and
yeah.
people turned up for you. What's the advice for people nowadays?
And like you say, sometimes people in that situation wouldn't have people. I had people visiting me over that 2 months, most days, whether it was colleagues or friends or a family. And that was very important. But it was also like connecting with people in that situation. So it was George with the walking, it was Tony with the table tennis. There was a nurse who was doing some weeding in a little garden, and she um, allowed me to come and help weed. And then it was a circular garden around, the rooms were kind of around this circular garden. And then my friends would bring some seeds and some plants in, and we'd put them in the garden. And another patient got her friend to bring a gnome in because there was a little pond in there. And it's about those little connections. So I'd walk around because there were huge long corridors, and the restlessness was one of the side effects of the medication. And I'd be walking up and down, even indoors if it was raining, and couldn't sit still for more than a couple of minutes. And yeah, even my visitors had to traipse around after me. Sometimes I'd sit down, but yeah. And yeah, so I would talk to people. There'd be a man playing his keyboard by his bed, and we'd have a little go playing the keyboard, one song each, and the woman who was laying with her Sony Walkman, showing the age at the time. And yeah, we'd just share those earphones. But I think because I grew up in a small town in Gloucestershire, so being in that kind of village was always important to me in life there. And at the age of 12, I started working in this one of the shops, the newsagent, toy shop, sweet shop, card shop, ice cream shop, everything shop, during school holidays and Saturdays. So I knew the whole town by working in that shop, and I'd talk to people and I'd see them outside, and so that has always been a big part of who I am in terms of the connecting with other people. And like you say, it is those small things, like the nurse that when I was hammering on the doors trying to escape one night, feeling that real desperation, wanting to escape. She didn't just come like on the other situation where the needle was put in my bum. She didn't just come and put a needle in my bum and put me back to bed, because that would have shut me up instantly and made her life nice and easy for the night shift. But it was the same nurse who was there on the first night. She, gently guided me to the dining room and sat with me while I ran round and round, discharging that, that energy and fear and frustration. And she sat with me until that passed and held that space for me to do that. And, then, she was able to talk to me about, there is going to be a future after this. They're not going to determine who you are forever, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think, I think what happened in the hospital there, what I kind of noticed that, so there were the patients that were there for depression, or they might be there with repetitive hand washing, or they were there in the bipolar, so they're in the manic situation. So I was in the manic situation, and a bipolar diagnosis I was given in that hospital. And so I was very much, at the stage where that energy was very strong. I was talking to everyone, and the depressed people didn't want the manic people talking to them.
Right.
So I remember it was like being a motor mouth. I didn't stop. And at one point there was jokes and putting tape over my mouth to shut me up, and, because I was annoying the depressed patients. And George, because he had bipolar disorder as well, and yeah, so sometimes he'd be feeling a bit low and I'd be kind of a bit high, and I'd annoy him. So yeah, we would come into clashes as well. But
yeah. So it's all about having the right people with you, whilst you're going through these things. And you talk about a village, leaning onto your village, and I just reflected on that, and I realized recently, I think last week, my neighbor moved out. It was a couple. They had 2 dogs. They've been my neighbor for about 2.5 years, and I realized that I didn't know their names, but I knew their dogs' names. I didn't know their names. So in your book, the vision that I saw people really rallying around you, and you said you knew everyone in the in your area and stuff like that.
That was in my childhood. So I was living in the city when it happened. So I grew up in Gloucestershire, and then I went from there to Northampton, to Brighton, and then Derby, where this happened.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
but living there,
sorry about that. Yeah. So even whilst in the city, you had people who turned up for you. And
Yes.
like I said, 2.5 years lived with my neighbors. I'll see them almost every day, but I didn't know their names. I would say hi, good morning, and good afternoon, whatever it is, and then we move along.
Yes.
If anything was to happen to me, those people are not showing up for me
No.
as your neighbors, your friends did for you. So again, that brings back the question: is what do people do now? Where is the village now?
Yeah. Because in Derby, I lived in a little 2 up, 2 down house in a little
Mm,
street, and there were 80-year-old neighbours in that street that
mm,
had a cat, and Harriet, she was called, across the road from me. She had a cat called Tabby, and I'd often go in. She'd invite me in for a cup of tea, and we'd sit and talk. And next door was May. She was like in her 80s as well. No cat there though. And yeah, so Harriet was there for a cup of tea, and then when I needed to go for a walk, when I came out of the hospital and like my confidence was totally on the floor, I couldn't go out the house or stay in the house alone in that state of heightened anxiety that I felt shot to pieces when I came out of that situation. And yeah, so Harriet, she connected me to a man up the road who could go on long walks with me during the day because people were at work. And so that was a total stranger that was connected by my neighbour. But
mm,
like you say, people don't have those connections with their neighbours now, 33 years on. I mean, I live in front of a big field, so
mm,
my little house comes onto a field. I have a dog, so when we moved here 5 years ago, I got to know a really lovely community of dog people on the field, and we spent a lot of time chatting on the field. So, yeah, and I know the person next to me. I have an elderly neighbour next to me who I know. Um, People next door, the other side, they moved in fairly recently. I've had one chat in the garden, but they don't seem to live there very much, so I don't see them. And yeah, there's another lady a few doors down who's got a little dog. She's probably in her 70s, 80s. And yeah, so it tends to be the older people that are all around that you perhaps might get to talk to. Because, like you say, people are so busy in their working lives and don't get a lot of space around. They may have children, they may have elderly parents they're looking after, they may have full-time jobs, and that
yeah,
people don't have that space around their lives to make those connections with people. And they tend to perhaps have interest communities. So they might be a runner and then they're part of a running group, or they might, like I do the cold water swimming. So there's a community called Milton Keynes Blue Tits, which came about 4 or 5 years ago, and there's about 4 or 5 thousand people on that Facebook group that uh, are connected to the cold water swimming group, and so I've made a lot of friends on there. And yeah, so we tend to connect with our interests now, don't we? Or through our work, we may have activities happen around our work. But yeah, I
yeah,
think that kind of neighborhood connection is not so strong as it used to be, and that is a
yeah.
big loss to our
And
community.
yeah, but I think that's really good advice in terms of like thinking about your interests. What communities can you get involved with that are in line with your interests, and from there you can start talking. So it's all about having those conversations, isn't it? Talking to
Yeah,
people.
yeah,
Sometimes actually talking to strangers might be the best thing. People that you don't know that well can be the people who give you the best advice. So yeah, I think looking around yourself, what is it you're interested in? What can you get involved in? And I like the idea of you mentioned about swimming. There are two things there.
yeah,
You get to meet people, but also it's I don't know, what do you do it? Is it for your physical health, mental health, or just for fun?
yeah. I, I, I mean, when I'm swimming out in a river or a lake, you're
Mm,
connected to nature. You've got,
mm,
the sunshine in, the ducks and the geese and the what birds are around, and it's just you can kind of, and the cold water means you can just reset mentally. It just kind of like shuts everything, all the clutter and noise in your mind. It shuts it all off. So I love doing that. I've been doing that for about 5 years now. And I also have a paddle board which I take on the river, and again that's just a really peaceful activity, standing and floating along on the paddle board along the river on a sunny day with some friends. It's just an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And sitting by the riverside chatting, so it's a very social activity. The cold water swimmers, and that all kind of really came to be during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, where cold water interest really kind of like it went everywhere, all over the country. People are doing that, and seeing the health benefits both for their mental health and their physical health.
Okay, so you got sectioned. You stayed in the hospital for some time. Let's talk about rebuilding your life.
Yeah, can I just talk? I'd just like to say a bit about the actual hospital first.
Sure.
Yeah, just to illustrate how different the environment of the hospital was then, and the benefits of that compared to what might be people are experiencing in crisis mental health nowadays. So yeah, in that hospital, it wasn't a really old institution. It was probably built in the 80s or 60s or somewhere around there, and it had huge grounds, like I said, so there were cherry trees and daffodils and expanses of grass. There were different buildings for different types of care within the hospital grounds, so it was a big site. And there were allotments, so I think they would grow some of the vegetables that was used in the food meal preparation. And yeah, you could get involved in weeding and the pulling up of the vegetables and all of that side of it. But there was also hanging baskets that you could make, and lots of different activities. So there was art spaces. There was a pottery room, an art room for painting and stuff. And there was a guy who made frames, so you could actually make a picture and have it, and then make a frame for it. And there was a cooking space where you could go and make tea scones and then take them back to the other patient. And there was a singing group. There was a therapy group where you all sat around and cried together. Oh, I did. I always like to cry. Yeah, so there were so many different things because imagine you're in there 24 hours a day, and what are you going to do? It's not like if you've broken your leg or you've had a serious heart situation where you have to lay in bed. You're obviously not in a place where you need to be laying in bed. But because there was so many facilities within that space, not everybody engaged with them. There was two TV rooms. There was a smoking room and a non-smoking room, and some people just sat in the smoking room all day, every day. So not everybody did get involved in those things. But being able to do that actually meant that the days were passing, the hours were passing, and you weren't just kind of like stagnating in the condition that you were experiencing. And then I think it was about 10 years after I went back to see what I'd moved to Milton Keynes, but I went back to see what mental health crisis care looked like in Derby at that point. And that hospital that I was in had been closed down. It didn't exist anymore, and there was a very small unit in the general hospital. So there were no big long corridors to walk up and down when you were, stressed out with the medication and restless. There was a little cooking space. There was a tiny little courtyard outside, with a greenhouse with a few dead plants in it. There was a couple of gym machines in a space, and that was it. There was one, a group room where they might have done group activities of some kind, but that it was if you look at the components that I had to get involved in, and you can see that would be more healing in that space if people were engaging with it than it was in this space where you were literally, the medication was literally controlling any kind of response or emotions or outbursts or any other response into from those conditions, and no space to no activities, nothing to kind of feed the mind in any way.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel like
Yeah, so it seems like you had a lot of things to focus on if you wanted to engage, like you mentioned, and compared to where we are now, uh, obviously, like things have developed in terms of like the knowledge and how to help people in the situation. But I guess when we are talking about the infrastructure, the environment that you were in,
yes,
it's more. It sounded more reluctant, more engaging, and something that you can, explore and do more as to be just
yeah,
being in your bed or on a ward waiting for your medication and then
yeah,
a few activities. I guess it shows again the importance of having activities in your life, isn't it, as part of your mental well-being kind of regime, so to say. You're
yes,
looking after yourself, they getting involved in different activities, things that you're interested in. People like painting. I talk to people who say when I'm stressed or if I'm feeling down, I paint and
yeah,
forget about everything else that's happening in my life, and things at that point in time when I'm painting, the world is perfect. And having that break from whatever is happening in your life and focusing on what you're interested in, I think it's very important. It's very powerful, and I think it's something that we can, people can find now. There's a lot of online communities that people can get involved in. There are a lot of things that in local areas that people can get involved. It's about just doing your research and finding out, okay, what is it that I can do? But obviously, if you're in a hospital, you'll be different. You're limited to to those things that you are given at the time, isn't it?
yeah,
Okay. Okay. So moving on to recovery or rebuilding your
yeah,
your life after this episode. What was that?
yeah. A lot of things were quite like my job. I could have lost my job during that space, but because my sister was like a dog with a bone, she made sure I didn't lose that job.
Mm.
And because there was discrimination, that one of the um, senior trustees of the charity was fed back, it came back to me that it was saying, oh, once a woman's neurotic, she's always neurotic. And, things were coming back to me that weren't very complimentary and reflective of the time around mental health. Yeah, so I knew that I had to go back to that job because I wouldn't get another job from, a standing start if I lost the job, or if I chose not to go back to it because of how it was, and people were coming feeding back what was being said. So that was obviously the first thing that I knew I had to go back to it. But like I said, when I came out of the hospital, I literally uh, anxiety was at such a peak. I couldn't go out or stay in without a huge amount of discomfort and panic and feeling of just wanting to get back into a safe place again. So, and I was lucky at the point when I did come out. My friend who was a lecturer, it was the summer holiday, so she was very much, available. And with her child, we'd go out and do things every day. She'd just come and take me out, not every day, but, regularly take me out. And I had other friends that had children as well. And they'd just take me along with them, even though I'd be saying, no, no, I don't want to, I can't do this. And even my dad, my most common thing I said to him was, no, I can't. And he'd say, yes, you can. I couldn't even believe that I could drive my car again afterwards because of things that had happened with the car during the incident. And yeah, so my dad actually, got me back in the car and got me driving around the city again. And so it was just step by step. I mean, it was just over a period of time, and just building. And I was on the medication for probably 2 or 3 years, and the psychiatrist said I would need that forever. But I I'd I'd seen the impact it had on George, and the physical state and the mental state that he was in from having a long relationship with a medication called lithium that is commonly used with bipolar disorder. And I just knew that couldn't be for life for me, that I had to find a way of taking responsibility for my own health in that sense. And also looking at it, I kind of looked at it like I'd created the behaviours that had created that situation so I could uncreate it. That was the way I looked at it when I was
What were
coming.
those behaviors?
So, well,
What
in
were those?
terms of the depressive behaviours or the manic behaviours, I saw it that I could shift how I was feeling emotionally, and then I went on a journey to find ways to do it. I didn't know how to do it at that point, but I just had this belief that I'd created it so I could uncreate it, and I could find that way. And I just kind of obsessively researched on all sorts of things, from neuroscience to psychology to NLP to I went on Tony Robbins's programs in America, and I did all sorts of research like that to keep understanding how the brain works, how mental health works, how it interacts with physical health, whether it's the gut and the impact that a healthy gut has on our brain, and nutrition and diet and exercise and all of that. That was like my compulsion to understand and study, and to use those things for myself. So, and often I'd do something for a couple of years and then I'd move on to something else. So I had this brain that always needed to be kind of learning and doing something new and different. They probably call it my sister said I would have probably been diagnosed with ADHD as a teenager as well. That kind of served me in a positive way, because I just kept searching and compulsively looking into that.
So it looks like you chose to take ownership of your situation and do something about it, which is something that it's very easy to feel sorry for yourself, isn't it? And let the diagnosis be your identity in a way sometimes. And from what you're saying here, you decided to take ownership and did your research into things and trying to understand what was going on with you. So if you were to give someone advice who's going through a difficult mental health situation at the moment, and looking at your journey and how you took ownership, what would be your advice to an individual?
Yeah. So at the point where it was a crisis situation, I was then in a situation where I was needing medication and taking that advice and help and exploring that route. And then at a point where I felt like I can now start to make other choices around this, I then started to make other choices. And I had a different psychiatrist when I made that decision to come off, who understood what I wanted to achieve and was very much on board with that decision. And and that was important that I did it alongside the support of the mental health professionals, and got to a point where I was then able to do different things. So mainly I used the cold water swimming, and I also used like different breathing techniques to calm, because now I can still have ups and downs. My mood goes ups and downs. It doesn't go to an extent that it needs intervention, but if it did, I would seek intervention again. I mean, after I finished the mayoral year as mayoress of Milton Keynes, it finishes like a really hard finish. Like you could be doing 7 events one day and then that's it, it's done. And it's all finished. and I found that transition was quite hard at first because I'd given up. I decided to resign from my job in children's services and take a new route forward, and developing my career as a mental health impact speaker and author, and doing all of that. But obviously I hadn't got started with that, and it went from this really 100 miles an hour in the mayoress role to waiting until things took place over a few months, because I did a course with Iffy Thomas, the TEDx and motivational speaker, and she did this 90-day paid speaker program. So I learned how to craft my talk, how to perform it, and how to then look to get paid to speak at different events. But there was a big space in that. So at that point, it was almost like a bit like a bereavement, that, you know, that I felt that huge sense of loss from the situation in the mayoral year. And I was in this space where something else I was waiting to start, and I had no idea if I could succeed in that space or what that might look like. But that was a big leap, and there was a few weeks where I just found myself crying every day. I'd just be, you know, crying for no reason. And yeah, that went on for like 2 or 3 weeks, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to spend time at the river, just, you know, paddleboarding and swimming and sitting with my friends, and just, you know, this will pass like other things that pass, and it did pass. And but if it hadn't, I'd have had to, you know, look at what else, maybe something else would have been needed. But I mean, even in the years ago when I had struggles and low mood, I read research around fish oils, that high dose of fish oils was as effective as Prozac and antidepressants. So seeing that research, it was in the Times. I read an article on it. Didn't normally read the Times, so I don't know how I came to see that, but I did. And yeah, the prescription I got, I didn't take. I used the fish oils, and within a few weeks, things were settling. Mood was coming up again. So it's always been about kind of researching what's coming out in the latest research in terms of mental health, because it's changed a lot in the last 2-3 years.
Yeah. So there is coming from you at the moment, there's a sense of acceptance that, okay, this is my life, this is my mental health, that's where it is now, and taking ownership of it and continually researching and talking to people, putting yourself in places where you learn more about what you're going through. And I think there's a lot of self-awareness as well that is required in situations like that, from what you're telling me here, that you need to understand yourself as a human being, understand your limits as well, if you're going through things. And you mentioned about crying, and I personally think that there's nothing wrong with a good cry sometimes.
Yeah,
and I feel like it's something.
I love crying.
Yes,
You ask my husband, I do a lot of crying. It's just a way of releasing those kind of feelings.
It can be,
I love going to a sad film and crying. The first time Mick went to the cinema with me when we got together 20 years ago, we saw Crush, I think the film was called, and I can't remember. But it was a really traumatic film, and I was like really crying and next to him, and he said, "Oh, do you need to go home?" I said, "No, I'm just responding to how I'm feeling in the moment in the film. This is what I do at sad films. I cry."
You have to accept your feelings. You know what
I
you
do.
feel.
I just
let it be.
let
Just
them
enjoy,
out.
sit in it.
Yeah.
And let it be. And I think it's a strong message for especially young men out there. You know, we grow up in different communities, and some communities, you know, you are told, you know, men don't cry. You know, be strong, men don't cry. But you know, it's one of those things that we have to move away from, to encourage people to sit in their feelings and let those feelings go. Because I feel like if you bottle them up, that's where you start they start showing in different situations,
Yeah,
anxiety,
impacting on
like,
your physical health and
yeah.
blood
So,
pressure and all sorts. I mean, I
yeah.
said about my dad losing his parents, and he had. I remember he said when his mum passed, and he was then sent to the Dr. Bernardo's. There was one occasion he was walking down the street before he went, and his mum's best friend ignored him and walked across the other side of the road when she saw him, and he cried. And he said then, at that point, he made a decision he would never cry again. No one would ever hurt him again. And he, just been hurt so much.
Yeah.
And I didn't even see him cry when my mum died. I mean, he may have done in private, but he didn't do it in public. And I always think, like, in our family, my parents, they also lost. They didn't bring home two babies from the hospital. They died at a week old in the hospital, the first baby and then the baby before me. And I think there was a lot of sort of covered up sadness in our family.
Mm.
And I think I just like expressed all that sadness for all of us, because I was the only one that was very expressive and emotionally in my family. And yeah, I think I just cried for everyone.
Quite heavy.
Cried.
No, no.
And again, like with those babies passing that are
Mm.
not coming home, they
Mm.
weren't talked about. Again, it was another thing in those days that wasn't talked about.
Mm.
I followed the last one, so obviously I didn't know, but I felt
Mm.
this huge sense of like sadness in the family at times,
Yeah.
growing up as an emotional, kind of like feeling in the family. Because it wasn't talked about. Whereas when I worked with families now,
Mm.
in my role in children's services, where people had lost babies like that, they were part of the living family's life.
Yeah.
And it was amazing for me to see how that could become, a different way of doing things to what was done in our family. Because
Yeah.
if we'd have been all out and sharing those emotions and feelings, then maybe I wouldn't have had that big explosion.
Exactly. Who knows? Who knows?
Who
I think
knows?
sharing is powerful. Is really, really
Yeah,
powerful. And sharing is what you do now.
yeah,
You recently did a TEDx talk, which is really
yeah.
doing well. I will put a link in the description box below. So if you are interested in listening to Mandy going through her story in her own words, powerful story, please follow the link below and listen to that. Um, why did you choose to share your story?
I think back in the 90s, because it was so public,
Mm.
everything I did that led to me being sectioned was out there in the public, around my workplace, around my friends. Everyone knew about it. So I didn't have a choice of keeping it quiet because things that happened were very out in the public domain. And that then led me to, alongside having the camera and creating the panels that I did in the hospital and put up on the wall in the hospital, and then finding a way then to get funding to create the exhibition for it to tour nationally. So it was very much, um, communicating into that space through the exhibition, through the TV, and all through my career, whether it was in community arts, I did projects with bringing in, survivors of mental health and people that were experiencing things. When my exhibition came to Milton Keynes, we created an exhibition alongside it with people locally that were experiencing mental health issues. So it was all, and then even working with families, if I was working with a family where they were experiencing either the young person or the parent bipolar disorder, or I shared my story in that space where it was appropriate, just to, just to show that there is life after these things, that we don't have to take that on as at an identity level.
Mm.
It's, something that it comes and it goes, and we can pass through and, find a way through it. And in the mail year, again, it was like having that platform. It felt like I would have been doing a disservice to all the
Mm.
people experiencing mental health if I stood there and didn't speak about that. So it became we had a health and wellbeing theme. Within that, I focused on mental health and brought about 25 different people working in young people and mental health together, whether they were clinical, public health or community-based professionals. And we had these deep dive conversations and a half-day conference exploring what we could do in the city to improve after the pandemic, what was going on with young people and their mental health. And yeah, so it just kind of evolved like that. And the first time I spoke was we had the UK Baton of Hope came to the city, the Suicide Awareness National Project, and I spoke in the Tree Cathedral. There were lots of events around that. Red Bull were involved, the stadium, using this space in the Tree Cathedral. So I shared my story there. I shared it in our civics service when we had I spoke about kindness. So I spoke about the kindness of those people like you discussed today. And then I was invited to speak at the Every Emotion is Valid convention with the African Wonder Women. And I just opened my mouth for 10 minutes and let my story out. And then the Women's Lodge, when Scott from the Man Cave set up the Women's Lodge, I was invited to do the launch of that, and we had 180 women came to that event. And also the Friends of the Caribbean, when they had their health conference, I was invited to be the keynote there. And like you were saying, that within the African community or Caribbean community or even South Asian Indian community, there's still a much higher level of stigma in those communities. And through the connections I made and relationships I built through the 2 years in that mayoral role, connected with a lot of those communities, and I've been invited then to speak and share my story, to encourage people in those communities to speak and share their stories. Which is, that's been really, really privileged to, to be invited in to speak in those events. I was at one last night with the Southeast Asian community up at Dreamside, where it's a well-being with an organisation called Community, spelt with a TEA, so it's Try and Chat. And yeah, it's a wonderful evening. I read some from my book. Last month I spoke my talk at that event as well. So yeah, it's amazing to be able to get out and, share it in all different ways. I've been into sixth forms, and Denby School locally, and the young people of whole assembly for the sixth form, speaking and sharing my story, and giving the young people a chance to ask questions, and they can kind of relate that then to their exam stress and freezing in exams. And so we've had some really good conversations, and I'm doing some NHS conferences coming up. I'm going to Lincolnshire in July to do 2 conferences with mental health, learning disability and autism teams. So yeah, so it's amazing how it's all kind of going.
Yeah, your story is touching a lot of different people from different backgrounds, different communities, different age groups, and that is amazing. That is amazing. And I think
Oh, thank you.
I bought this one and I read it. I read it twice.
Thank you.
And it's a small book.
Yeah.
But so I believe in now when people say big things come in small packages. This is a small book, and I encourage people to really invest. It's only what is it?
It's on. It's £10.
£10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you buy it on the website, though, it adds postage on, so it does have £2.90.
So if someone wants to buy it, where do they buy it?
I will be doing another book later, which will focus, because that one focuses really on that hospital experience, and it also puts it into context of my wider life. But I want to do something that explores more that journey from coming out of the hospital to, becoming mayoress. There's a lot in between there that isn't talked about in that book. So it's a lot
I'm looking
more
forward to
to
that already.
explore. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So
Um,
they people can buy this on your website, which I'll put the
yeah.
link in the description box below, and also listen to your TEDx, which I mentioned already that I will put the link in there. If people want to work with you, let's say there are organizations, there are schools, communities that want to reach out to you and work with you, how do they reach you?
They can go on the website, and there's a link to book a call, so they can book a call to chat if they'd like to talk about an event or collaboration that they'd like to discuss with me. Or they can go onto LinkedIn. I record, lots of things along my journey are on LinkedIn. That's the platform I use most. So it's Mandy and Legg, Legg. And yeah, that's a good way to connect as well. And the website with my emails on there and everything as well.
Yeah. Mandy, thank you very much for your time. Like I mentioned earlier when we started, this is the Mental Health Awareness Week. Before you go, if you are to walk into a mental health institution right now, and you see an individual who just been sectioned, what would be your advice? What would you say to them?
I think in that situation, it'd be more about holding that emotional space to listen and hear what they were experiencing in that moment, like that nurse did when I first went in there, and she held that space of, kindness and just openly listened and allowed me to talk. I think that is a very powerful space to hold, that emotional space for people.
Perfect.
I mean, yeah, and I can say that, think we can go through these struggles, but we don't know what's going to come out the other side.
Yeah.
It's my dog barking. It's the postman. And, we can go through struggles and something very powerful can come out of those struggles. Our biggest thing we can create in life sometimes comes out of our biggest pain, doesn't it? We can go through something that at the time feels really, really like a mountain to climb, but we can come out and find ourselves in a space that, has so much more meaning and purpose. And I think, by experiencing that myself, I came out with a determination that I would do everything I could to find a way, to make myself the healthiest and in the best place that I could be.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to the next book, and when we sit down again to discuss that next chapter of your life.
Yeah.
And for everyone listening, please, we are here to give you information, advice, guidance, and all the tools and resources that you need to help you to make those life-changing, informed decisions. And this week, it's all about mental health awareness. You need to look after yourself. You need to create a community around you. Find people that you can talk to regarding your mental health. You have to look after your mental health as you would look after your physical health. And it is your responsibility as an individual to communicate to people around you how you are feeling. And for young men out there, like we talked here with Mandy, there's nothing wrong with a good cry. Cry if you have to. Talk to people around you. It doesn't make you less of a man because you're feeling what you're feeling. It's important to express how you're feeling so you're not bottling it in. I will post some resources in the description box below where you can follow those websites to get more information about your mental health and how you can start that journey of really looking after yourself as you would register to or book or join a gym. I would strongly suggest that do something that is dedicated to your mental health because you need it to be healthy. So there we have it, guys. share. If you think this will help someone, share with your work colleagues, friends and family. Subscribe to the channel so we keep growing. We get more people like Mandy coming to sit down with us and giving us information, advice and guidance. Thank you very much, guys. I'll talk to you next week.